Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Hangout on air. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. And tonight we're running a thin crew of Dave, the Savage Maven Scott, and Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Ooh, scary.
So, in honor of Halloween, 'tis the season, let's talk some horror. Tonight's episode is entitled Fast, Frightening Fun. And that is really kind of the topic we're going to focus on is how do you run a horror game in Savage Worlds without making too many or any alterations whatsoever to the actual core rules? Can you run a scary game, a frightening game, a horror game in Savage Worlds with no special setting rules? A lot of people tell you, nope, Savage Worlds is too pulpy. It's too pulpy. There's no way. No way it can't be done. You cannot run a horror game where players can soak wounds from bennies with bennies and avoid death and avoid damage. How are you going to scare your players?
I hear Savage Worlds isn't immersive. There's no immersion.
There's no immersion? You mean like there's no rules obfuscation? Is that what we're talking about?
I hear it has something to do with GM screen.
Oh, a GM screen. Okay. The GM Baba Banky?
Mm-hmm.
The binky.
The Binky?
No, I think that to a certain extent, and then I was on. Oh my God, I feel horrible. James
International.
International. There we go. The Gathering of Dorks. I wanted to say the Wild Die, and that's not it because that's his Savage Worlds one. I was on the other one. Anyway, I was over there, and they wanted to talk about immersion in Savage Worlds and how you can't get that scare moment because you have to say the "give me the notice roll" to spot the ninjas coming out of the tree or whatever. And I pointed out to them, that's not it at all. You can absolutely disavow the Ron Blessing method and just say, give me a notice roll and not inform them what it's for. Go through the whole Benny process and make them make that decision themselves based on not knowing what they're trying to spot, whether it's worth a Benny. You can do that. It's not against the rules as written. I think it's against the spirit, though. And that's where the Ron Blessing thing really kind of comes in, because that way they can make an informed decision with the Benny. That's not the problem. The problem is your player always knows if I roll a 4, it's a success. If I roll a 5, it's a success. But if I roll a 3, it's a failure. So if you tell me that I see something when I clearly rolled a 3, the player knows you're fibbing to them. They know that that's not what they really should have been seeing in the bushes. They see the black cat run out. Well, what they didn't see is the chupacabra in the bush that scared the black cat out because they failed the roll, and they know that. In other systems, they don't know what that target number is. And I think that's the bigger problem with this. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of coming at it the wrong direction for the game. The scare is when they get to that moment and then you describe, the bush shakes violently and you see movement. Give me a notice roll. That's where you've scared your player if you've done it correctly. You go with a very evocative description of what's going on. The spooky nature of the night, the dead quiet that was going on. Right after crickets were up, and then you hear that drop to silence and movement. And give me a notice roll. I think that's where you can really hit that punch for that immersion moment.
Right. Well, there's also this situation too. When you talk about immersion, let's hop down the immersion bunny trail just for a moment, and go off on that tangent for just a second, because it's a word that gets bandied around a lot in role playing, not just with Savage Worlds, but with other systems. And from my understanding and my view of the word immersion as it's being used in a role playing game is no metagame. You're not players
Right.
are so into what's going on that
They're
they
not
temporarily forget that they're playing a game.
And I think that's hard to get
Good
in
luck.
a game. Yeah, that's
Good luck.
really, really hard to get. The whole horror thing is, even when you have a make that notice roll, it can kind of take that tension out of it, I think. So horror, I think, is kind of difficult to run in general. I mean, that's just me, but I think that's one of the harder genres to run. I don't care what system. I think a system that does it the best is Dread.
The Jenga tower pole thing is interesting, but once again, that's not an immersive thing. That's a game.
Right. That's a game
That's
thing.
a gamification
mechanic. It's a game mechanic, though, that reinforces that adrenaline high of each scare moment, because now you that wham. Fuck.
You know, and I'm not saying it's a. I think I've done it one time that I recall really well, and that was in my Deadlands game. And and I even had all the players in that moment to, okay, this is really starting to freak us out. This is getting really, really creepy. And I was like, oh yes, that's kind of what I was going for, and it's working. And it was all through description, and it was all through that narrative of them. They didn't have to make any rolls. I just put that out there to them and just kind of try to give that feel of creepiness.
Right. Well, and here's the thing too. So we were talking about immersion, right? To me, immersion is the same thing as suspension of disbelief.
Okay. Yeah.
As long as I'm sitting at the table, I have a certain amount of buy-in as a player at a table that, okay, we're playing this kind of game. No amount of expert description, no amount of secret roles, no amount of surprise or suspense is going to convince me that I'm suddenly a medieval knight or a wizard, that I'm going to buy into it at that level or that conceit. And I think that what a lot of GMs are doing with the idea of immersion is trying to force player buy-in. And I think, if not necessarily force it, but artificially create player buy-in at the table to the story that they're telling.
I don't know if it always comes from the GM. A lot of the time, the people I hear talking about this are the players. They want to be immersed. They don't want to think about the fact they're in a game. They want to think about the story and think about what their character's feeling in that moment. And that's all well and good, but honestly, if that's what you're looking for, your GM better be the kind of guy that sits around the campfire telling scary stories. Because otherwise, it's never going to work. That's that key at that point, is being a scary storyteller is a very specific set of skills. Even look at authors. You have a lot of authors out there that can write anything. Very few write good horror. And it takes that specific skill set to run a horror game to begin with. And if your players are looking for that from your average GM, I don't care what you use to prop it up, it's not going to happen. Not because you're not getting player buy-in. Those players are desperate wanting that horror moment. But if that GM doesn't have that skill set, it's not going to work.
I can agree with that.
So what would you say if somebody said, okay, so how do I get that skill set, or what are some things that would lead to that skill set? What would you say?
You have to become a fan of horror. I mean, it's like anything else. You need to understand what the rules are to telling a horror story. We're all familiar with a few of them. The final girl trope. The idea that it's the virginal, smart girl who is the sole survivor because she didn't
do anything impure through the and sometimes it's not even the virginal girl as much as just the one who was the least impure through the course of the
right.
Of the
don't have sex in a horror film because you're going to be dead.
Absolutely not. Everyone who has sex in a horror film dies. The first death is typically the black friend, the token black friend that's there. It's everybody goes and follows the killer, or breaks the shoe, or twists an ankle at the opportune moment.
Yeah, they run upstairs and hide in an unlockable closet instead of running out the front door.
Well, it's that Geico. Was it Geico? It's that Geico commercial.
Yeah.
Let's go hide behind the chainsaws.
Right. And that's another part of it, is that's just genre blindness. If you're going to play in the game as a player, you have to set your knowledge, meta knowledge of the genre off to the side and go along with the ridiculous. Well, of course I don't run downstairs. I don't go into a basement with no lights on. After I hear a blood-curdling scream.
So I agree with you. It's got to be a lot about the players as well. The players have to be
absolutely
really, really bought into it.
The players cannot do any of the things they would scream at the television or movie screen at the characters on film. When you're yelling at them, that's the dumb mistakes you've got to actively make your character do if you want to play in a horror movie properly. This is one of that we run into quite a bit with Jared's Dead End game, is everybody wanted to come in a combat character who shot for the head in a world where they've never heard of a zombie. They don't know that you have to shoot them in the head. And everyone has this wealth of zombie knowledge because we've been inundated with the zombie genre now, so much so that it's become a meme in everything else. But unfortunately, your character in that moment is not supposed to be aware of any of that. They are supposed to think, that's another human being who needs my help, and walk right up to the zombie right into bite range.
Yep. And the other thing too is, in order to be a good horror GM, not just for Savage Worlds, but for any system, you have to know what the beats are, the standard beats in horror storytelling. That's why you always get isolation is the big one. Oh, it's Camp Crystal Lake. There's nobody around for miles and miles. We're in a haunted farmhouse. The closest city is a 50-mile drive through dirt roads at night. Because it violates all of our deep evolutionary psychological things about being prey to predators. Mm-hmm. That's why we huddled in caves at night around a fire for protection. Human beings are afraid of the dark at a very deep psychological level. So if you can turn out and make sure all the lights go out, there's one thing you can do to sort of reemphasize that. Feelings that you're being watched. As a GM, you don't have to say, give me a notice roll. You just go, it's suddenly very, very quiet.
Hair on the back of your neck stood up like someone just walked across your grave.
Yeah, it's weirdly quiet. You get the sense that someone's peering into your back. You get the sense you're being watched. Any of those things that you play on it, and that's also too, so there's also the tension release roller coaster in a horror story that you have to understand as well. And that is, put them in a situation where the characters are going to feel dread or apprehension. Amplify that. Give them a fake scare. So they release the tension. So it's the black cat jumps out of the window. Oh, thank goodness. It wasn't wasn't as threatening as it really should have been. And then when they're going, hey guys, it's just the cat, they get stabbed through the back with the back of the chest with a knife, and you're back up on that again. So just watching horror movies and studying the storytelling pace is a big, big step, I think, towards becoming a good horror GM.
We talk a lot about don't make players make unnecessary dice rolls in a normal Savage Worlds game. That's how you get that fast, furious, fun feel, is that if they're going to find a clue, they find a clue. If they're going to spot, the crosses in the middle of town with people strapped to them 30 miles away, you just tell them that. You don't make them give you that notice roll. The interesting aspect, though, with horror is I think there are some roles that become important roles that normally wouldn't be. Somebody wants to start the car. Oh, that's a driving roll just to get the vehicle started. Why?
And a -2.
Because it's a trope of the genre that there's always the car that fails to start in that opportune moment.
You're running to the forest. Give me an agility roll, not to twist your ankle.
Exactly. You're running across flat ground. It's the front yard of the house that you're the babysitter at. I still need that agility roll to cross the yard because there's always someone who breaks a heel, twists an ankle, steps in a gopher hole and wrenches their knee. Doesn't matter. Come up with some narrative for it. They catch their foot on the edge of the sidewalk and go tumbling and crack their head on the cement. I don't care. There needs to be some punch to normal situations that call for dice rolls, and then in situations that might normally call for a dice roll in Savage Worlds, other games where you're doing that pulp game are not. Yes, just automatically tell them that they see the bush shake. Mm-hmm. Automatically tell them they feel that moment of dread. Automatically give them certain moments. They want to take an action that might normally require a dice roll, but isn't integral to the horror aspect of the game. Just give it to them. Yeah, you automatically. Yeah, you know how to fly a plane. Your character's a pilot. You absolutely come in, make the landing, taxi down the runway, park the plane, and then wander off into the forest to go get lost at the cabin. The plane taxiing in absolutely should not be a dice roll in a horror game because it's not part of building that tension.
Right. Until you're trying to escape. And then now...
And then you're going to play a piloting roll just to start the damn plane.
I like that. That's actually a really, really good way to think about it. That's a great idea.
The other thing you can do, too, is a lot of horror gaming is about uncertainty. So what you can do is you can always, as the GM, kind of cast little spurs of suspicion on other player characters as a killer. And I think the movie, if you want to become a good student of that, you need to watch the 1990s Scream series. That is a great opportunity as a GM, especially when they split the party, and you know they will. The second they do, have something happen and just whisper or, just plant that idea in the head of the other player. Hey, you know what?
I would take it back further than that and go watch The Thing.
Yes, The Thing is the ultimate. Yes. Paranoia.
Yeah, very much so.
Paranoia.
Yeah. And get one player on board with it. Offer them a Benny. Offer them a GM Benny once a session to create paranoia. We've had in our Friday night game, we're doing a vampire hunter thing, and we ran into a creature that can basically take on the shape of another person, and when it does, it gets their voice, it gets their memories, everything. And one of the player characters just like a dog on a bone. Well, you could be one of them. You could be one of them. You could be one of them to everybody, no matter what the situation was.
That's what one of them would say. I'm not one of them. That's exactly what one of them would say. Yeah.
If you can get one player to do that, it completely flips that scene. And now you've got the tension and the release all at the same time. There's tension in the story that their characters really are convinced that this might be an imposter. The release is for the players. They're all sitting laughing at this inter-party, conflict because none of them know. No one's been passed the note for the GM to let them know who is actually a bad guy in disguise.
The best example of paranoia is one we go back to again and again and again, and it's Mr. Happy Man with his manicured lawn. That was a brilliant.
Okay, let's talk about John Stamos again in the Undead for anybody in the podcast who hasn't heard it yet.
For people who have somehow missed it.
Yeah, somehow missed it. We've talked about this so many times.
Okay, the reason I'm going to just kind of preempt it so anybody who's familiar with the story will get right to the meat and bone of it. The reason that works as a horror device is because it is 100% out of place. It is the uncanny valley. This wait, this should not look like this. This should not be here. Therefore, it is automatically wrong and dangerous.
And it has to be a complete 90 degrees off. It cannot be too far off, otherwise it becomes a joke. It has to be just far enough off that it completely stands out that it's out of place, but there's still some way you could rationalize why it exists. Mm-hmm. That's where you hit that perfect boiling point where your players will still make, jokes and stories and shit about that.
Well, I rationalized why it existed because he was gonna kill us and eat us.
Right, but none of your rationalizations are good, and that's the point.
Exactly.
It's the, oh my God, this is so out of place, it has to be wrong.
Right.
It has to be. And then real quick, for anybody who's not aware, the players were basically starving. They just escaped a huge zombie herd. They hotwired a vehicle, were driving through a street in a small town, laid out in your standard small city grid, maple, elm, walnut streets, cross streets. Everything looked like a burnout, shambled war zone. And here, right in the middle of it, was this perfectly manicured front lawn with a white picket fence and white aluminum siding on the house, pink flamingos and garden gnomes. Idyllic 1950s. An idyllic 1950s home. And then here comes the token I chose just by accident was John Stamos. So you've got this very
Uncle Jesse.
This very amiable, affable guy, likable guy with a cup of coffee, waving at the guys. So, hey, come on in.
No, everybody's like, fuck out.
Nobody in character said anything. All the players went, oh, fuck no. All the fuck no. All the no. Nope.
Yep.
Well, it's also, moments like that are what get retold. It's something that's so far off. You can also take a character's hindrance. One of the prime examples that I think of would be the main character from Zombieland. Through the entire thing, he's talking about all this stuff he's afraid of, and then when they have that big moment for the reveal, and he's sitting in the John, he's talking about his fears. They hit you with an irrational fear of clowns with a clown coming underneath the stall door at him. And then they hit you later on. They never touch that again for most of the movie. And then the climactic moment, that character is confronted with a clown as a zombie. So now you've taken all the things that you're putting the fear into and dumping them on that character all at once. And I think that's the other beat you've really got to hit with a horror game specifically is you've got to hit those big hindrances just right. Pulp game, you can kind of hit a hindrance, a little crab, and it's okay. But with a horror game, you've got to hit them dead on and hit perfect notes. Otherwise, it just ruins it.
Yep. Now, also, too, we're talking specifically Savage Worlds. So how do you use what's already there and in Savage Worlds to tell that horror story cooperatively at the table? I'm going to say that the first thing you do as a GM is you become very, very stingy with the bennies.
Yeah.
That becomes a very precious resource of, oh, shit. Do I choose to fail, or do I choose to basically reserve these and hoard them as hit points?
See, and I kind of go the other direction in that you've got to use those bennies as the dog treats. When someone does that thing that reinforces. When you've got that player that starts throwing the paranoia out. When you've got that player who makes the dumb genre decision, that immediately gets a Benny, no questions asked, because that sends that message to everyone at your table. This is what your job is at the table to help do the cooperative part of the storytelling.
Yeah,
that's
you could do that.
That's a very good point.
In a different way of don't give bennies for the jokes. Don't give bennies for the riffing with each other. Give bennies for appropriate play for genre. So I think you could do it. You can do it both. You can be stingy, but give bennies for the right reason.
Well, what we're just saying is that you don't want a super high Benny economy.
Right. Yeah, you don't want them to end the game.
Horror to where, the axe murderer could walk up and hit him for 8 wounds, and they just, I've got 10, 12 bennies. I'll just soak all that shit. It's no problem.
Well, by the same token, we're currently playing a game where I can have 14 bennies. I'm not safe.
That's true.
That's again. I think it really depends on the game. I don't think Benny economy is necessarily a great thing, but it can be. I mean, if you're doing Cthulhu, abso-freaking-lutely, you want very few bennies in the economy. But if you're doing, more action hero horror, vampire hunters, think about John Carpenter's vampires. There's a lot of bennies being spent in that game. But along with the bennies, along with the comedy, along with all the things the players are normally doing, there's a good helping of, horror dolloped in every few beats to make sure you remember this is not an upbeat action movie. It is absolutely a horror film.
Right.
Another thing I think, to go back to your thing on uncertainty, horror is the absolute best place for any of the card mechanics in Savage Worlds. Dramatic tasks, chases, anything where there's a card draw and to see if, oh, look, this happens. Oh, look, you got a club at the most inopportune moment. Now avoid that obstacle or the chase ends and you've been caught by the axe murderer. You have to draw on the tools that we have that add in that same uncertainty, because then even the GM doesn't necessarily know when the murderer is going to catch him.
Right.
Drop gritty damage.
Yeah, well, you can put gritty damage from Savage Worlds in. I mean, you absolutely, it's appropriate. I think critical failure is appropriate as a setting rule. Blood and guts, definitely appropriate as a setting rule. Because it gives your GM the opportunity to really literally like hack one of the players apart on some good damage rolls. The other thing too is we talked earlier about the psychological impact. So the uncanny valley, I want to go back and just sort of touch on that briefly. It's a psychological thing. That's why people find clowns scary.
Robots,
little girls like possessed dolls, because they look very, very similar to humans, but they're slightly off. There's not a lot of facial expression that you can read for visual communication, physical communication. So, and the clown's always got the smile painted on its face, which you just know, oh my God, it's painted on. And it's supposed to, the clown thing is supposed to put you at ease. But at the same time, it is so off that it causes a lot of people to be afraid of clowns. I read somewhere like 54% of adults have a phobia of clowns.
Yeah, at some level. To be fair, there's been the whole hubbub in the media recently, and I was like, man, if I had the time, I would love to run, a Savage Saturday Night based on what's currently going on.
Yeah, the clown apocalypse.
Yeah, no, we're the creepy clown sightings. I think is what Dave was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's been the YouTube clown pranks on YouTube for like 10 years.
Oh yeah.
And I think it'd be a great set. Okay, so here's a challenge. You want to run, anybody in the audience, if you run it, please, I would love an invite to this game, or I would love to see the actual play or hear the report. But cast the players. The player characters are trying to film a YouTube clown prank out in the streets, and the citizens are rising up and chasing them and beating them and trying to kill them. There's your horror. But okay, so just to touch on the uncanny valley thing, what we were just talking about. So you can do that. You can do that same thing with anything. It doesn't have to be a character. It could be a long hallway with a single flickering light at the end. It could be you're walking through the forest and one of the trees, the moon hits it just right, and it's in a clearing, and it almost seems to come alive. It's mangled and different than all the other trees, because that's going to cause a psychological thing like, wait, there's something going on around that tree that's bad.
And a good portion of these should be red herrings. They should not. They absolutely should not be the actual horror beat. They should be the off beat. This is the thing that's going to throw your players into high alert so that you can give them the false scare.
And then what you can also do, too, as a horror GM, is you can avert the tropes. You can fuck with the tropes. So when the player goes down into the basement and they're expecting the jump scare, full-on attack them. Full-on attack Jason. Yep, Jason's down there. No, wait, the serial killer's
right on the big bad.
The serial killer's never down there when you go to check because you heard something. It's supposed to be a cat or something. Oh, I'll be safe. I might fall down the stairs. Then they flick on a light, and he's literally standing right there when they go to flick on the light. And just, bam, give me a fright check. 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 Now, this is just personal opinion. I would make one slight change if running a horror game to rules as written, and I would not make characters roll on the fright table. If they fail a fright roll as a GM, by all means, go. You now have a minor phobia of the dark. You now have a minor phobia of light bulbs. You now have a minor phobia of cats for the rest of this session. You are freaked the fuck out. Failed fear check should just automatically, in my opinion, result in shaken, and let the player role play the character's natural reaction to the fear. Don't try to manufacture it. Give them the opportunity to actually role play what they think their character would do. And that's been one of Dave and I's conceits for quite some time, like going on a year now. And I tend to agree with it. What you could do is on a failed fear check, you could treat it as a nausea add-on in a horror game to where they actually suffer fatigue, which brings them down by a -1 to their rolls for each time they do it.
Depending on the game, I think that definitely makes sense. Another great Savage Worlds mechanic that I think works well there is actually fatigue, though. You put those characters in situations that drain them. Put them up against something that puts them at the raggedy edge. They've got to be just pushing themselves to the limit so that it makes sense for them to be making these bad decisions. Oh, look, I can run out the front door or I can duck into the closet, but running out the front door means I have to run down the stairs and make an agility roll ducking into the closet that is free. Now I've got that incentive as a player. I've got 2 levels of fatigue. I'll trip, fall down the stairs if Jared's going to make me take falling damage. I'm going to duck into the closet instead. And now you've incentivized mechanically
making bad decisions,
dumb things that you do in a horror movie.
Yep, excellent point.
And if you really want to use a fear chart, 12 to Midnight makes a really hellacious fear chart.
Oh, and to be fair, I mean, the horror companion's got some great rules for fear. The reason that Jared and I come down on the side of just have a failed fear check be that shaken roll is if you've got players who want agency in that moment, who want to be able to describe what their character does in fright, absolutely, it's a shaken, and hand that narrative ball to them. But if you've got players who don't, they just showed up, they want to play in a game, and they want you to tell them what happens, then make that fright roll. Go grab your horror companion, grab the core rules, look at the table, and have whatever's in the book happen.
Right. I just want to reiterate this conceit. Remember that the more times you call for a roll, the slower you make the FFF of Savage Worlds.
Right. Sure.
So if it's, okay, grid damage is, okay, we roll damage. Okay, every time I take a wound that I can't soak, I now have to make a vigor roll on this table. And now I got to go to conference's table. And the next thing, that can, especially in combat, can drag you, pull you out of the moment, out of the pacing, and it can slow down your game because you're having to make additional rolls and check tables when you can just as easily go, you're frightened, you're shaken, done, shaken. How do you react? That's all we're saying. All we're saying it's the faster.
And I mean, let's talk for a second about shaken. Shaken's a big deal in the horror setting. your character can take none of those active combat-style actions. You can still run away, but you can't take any of those active combative role player actions of, they're trying to intimidate the guy, trying to trick the monster to go the other way. You can't, take a swing at it with an improvised weapon. You have one option and one option only: flee. That's what you can do when shaken. That is a big part of the horror genre, is putting them in that powerlessness moment. Shaken does that. And that's why I think don't underestimate making them go by that fear table. Don't underestimate having the bad guy suddenly pop up. You do that jump scare and have it be an intimidation roll where they're rolling against a 18 intimidation because you dropped all your GM bennies at once to make sure they're shaken for, possibly a round or two, depending on if they're carrying a couple levels of fatigue. Might make that, harder to recover from shaken.
Okay, now, so I'm going to throw this in here. I know that any of our loyal listeners are going to automatically assume that I'm going to tell you to take the new shaken rules for a horror game and burn them. I would say exactly the opposite.
What?
I can
Chris.
I can come down on spend a Benny to unshake. Get a success to unshake. Because, and here's why. In a horror game, as a GM, if the players are not carrying penalties from bumps and bruises that are temporary, they're not carrying levels of fatigue, they are going to be repeatedly shaken over and over. There's a high possibility they're going to get repeatedly shaken over and over again, which is a Benny drain. Trying to unshake in a horror game adds its own level of immersive tension. I don't need to complicate it for a horror game.
Okay, who are you and what did you do with Jerry?
It's not necessary. It's not necessary because here's my main issue with the shake and change for anybody who's not aware. It takes away a certain tactical type of gameplay at the table that was only available when you had the staggered levels of recovery. That's, to me, is the only time it matters. If I were going to play a modern, like, for example, I'm putting together a Savage Jason Bourne, and I'm using the shaken rules from the Explorers Edition in that game because it makes more sense because they're high-level operatives. They're going to be chased by high-level operatives, and it allows for more tactical type play with the players.
There's going to be more things like flashbangs and stuff that are used specifically to achieve that, so you want it to have a tail.
Right.
Interestingly enough, there's been this rule kicked around in the back of my head for a little bit. A house rule I might suggest is shaken that's not caused by damage can't be removed with the drop of a Benny. It's one I've considered for high tension games where an intimidation or something of that nature, a fright that leaves that character shaken, should have a longer tail on it than getting sucker punched in the gut when your adrenaline is up because now you're faced off with Jason. Now you're faced off with the alien. In that moment, your adrenaline's up so high you're going to recover from shaken normally. That drop of a Benny is you calling upon as a player the mechanic to simulate that. But when it's just fear, just that nagging sense of dread, it makes sense that you can't shake that feeling as quickly. Stop and think about your average horror movie. There's at least one character who spends the entire movie shaken. He gets shaken from the first intimidation of the monster, and through the rest of the movie, he never takes an action. He's constantly running away, screaming for help. You have that trope character, and while it may not necessarily sound fun from a Savage Worlds perspective, from a horror perspective, it's an amazing thing as a player to try to come up with shit for your character to do when he can't do anything.
Yep. Well, and so we'll talk to immersion. We talked about everything else. Oh crap! Brain fade. Sucks to get old. I was right here, then bam, just fell out. Talks amongst yourselves while I try to recover it. So we were talking this shaking thing. So yeah, there's different ways to go about it. I would highly recommend using bumps and bruises from Savage Worlds instead of wounds. So make a vigor roll, make an agility roll, not to fall down the side of the sloped forest. Oh, you failed the agility roll. I got a level of bumps and bruises.
Yeah, you tumbled, you twisted your ankle, 1 level of bumps and bruises. It's not a wound. It's not the one-legged hindrance. You didn't pick up lame, but you did pick up a level of fatigue.
Yeah, that's going to stick with you for the next 4 to 6 hours. I mean, in Savage Worlds terms, it's supposed to be, rules is written, 24 hours. I would say make it probably 4 hours or when dramatically appropriate, because if you're dealing with a horror game, especially if you're doing a one-shot, nobody's expected to live or survive past the one session. I mean, ideally. If we're running Cabin in the Woods.
If you're doing it right.
Yeah, if you're doing it right. We're running Cabin in the Woods. Yeah, I'm not going to make it last.
The flip side to that, though, is your ETU, the consistent horror genre where, again, I still think the bumps and bruises fatigue is an appropriate way to go, but for a slightly different angle in that in an ETU game, it's a little more difficult to explain away why your character shows up to class with their arm in a sling every Wednesday. Why they always show up with another broken bone. You end up, that character ends up having to take on like the college klutz type persona just because you're constantly carrying a wound or two on your character from all these crazy adventures you're going on.
Right. Right. And okay, so here's one other thing we're gonna talk about. What when it comes to your villain, what's your flavor of horror to run? Because there's different conceits, there's different tropes, there's different things that you want to involve in that storytelling. For Dead End, for example, it's not a zombie apocalypse setting. Zombies are in the setting, yes. Civilization has fallen, yes. But that is not at all about the zombies. The zombies are a hazard, just like fire, winter, the real point of that game, from a concept and conceit, is a survival horror. Heavy emphasis on the words survival, because what you're really faced against is the possibility of dying from disease, and easily dying from disease, infection, starvation, exposure, or just other survivors who are just as desperate to survive, trying to kill you and take your shit. If you're running a zombie game, by all means, run it as a zombie game. Absolutely nothing wrong with putting a comedic Zombieland twist on stuff and running it pulpy with Savage Worlds if you want, and everybody can have a ha 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 ha, this is funny kind of moment with a few real scares in it and a few real moments of, oh, crap. There's also the slasher flick, the classic slasher flick. Very heavy on the gore, so a lot of nausea, vigor checks that come into play, a lot of fear rolls, and you should make your serial killer invulnerable.
Has a weakness that they have to find, or that they never find.
Or they don't have a weakness. They're just invulnerable. Or you have to chop them up in so many pieces that they just no longer work. Because if you think about what's happened to Michael Myers or Jason from Friday the 13th, they've been set on fire. They've been drowned. They've been hacked and slashed. They've been run over by vehicles. They've been everything in the book. And the conceit about that is they're the unstoppable killer. They're possessed by a demon. They just keep getting back up and coming again.
The Terminator, the Alien, nothing you have will stop them.
And that also reinforces the oh my God, I'm powerless. The only choice we have is to run.
Get the hell out.
Yeah. You can also do. I think that if you're going to do a ghost stories can be very, very powerful for horror. I think they're often overlooked, and they don't have to be the Victorian style horror. Set it in a hotel where everybody, was killed, like a serial killer was staying there weekly and killed everybody in the hotel over the course of time, whatever. And your role as a GM, if you're going to do a horror, is, and I'll get back to the ghost thing here in just 1 second for kind of a rules reference. When you're going to do horror, it's very important that you understand the genre that you're setting it in. So if you're doing slasher, understand how slasher works. If you're doing ghost stories, understand what the tropes and the foundations of those are. The key thing to remember is whatever you're doing, rich, developed backstory of your main enemy. Give the players something to discover. Like, let the camp counselors start. Like, this. I think this would make an interesting Savage Worlds horror. You're the kids at Camp Crystal Lake, and you have the camp counselors are the NPC allies who get killed one by one, and then Jason comes after you. So
that's actually out there. Camp Bikini.
Mm-hmm. And an interesting aspect to that, we didn't touch on, that's absolutely right up the Savage Worlds alley, Allied Extras. Oh my God, Allied Extras make amazing grits for the mill.
Yes.
You want that moment to have someone just be eviscerated in front of the entire party to force that nausea check. Nothing works as good as an Allied Extra. And preferably a little kid, the pregnant mother, the little old lady, someone your players are naturally going to feel protective toward as players toward that character, much less as characters toward the character. And then that character is just absolutely decimated in front of them.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so let's say we're going to do a horror. We're going to do it, and we're going to do a classic, or we're going to do a ghost story. However you want to do it as a GM, make the house that it's in come alive for the players. I would say give almost every room a personality when you're creating it. The great thing about Ghost is it's already in the core rule book. Tells you everything you need to know about, hey, here's a ghost. If you want to do possession, very simply, just give the ghost the puppet power and then narrate what the character does while they have ghost possession. I mean, it's that simple. If you want them to possess an actual player character, the ghost just has the puppet power. And while they're in control, they're wearing like a bodysuit. I would also recommend not overlooking the dirty GM trick of dream sequence.
Yes.
But you have to be very good. You have to be good at inserting it to where it's a point where everybody's sort of falling asleep, and then you narrate for one character or all of them. You wake up and Jason's standing over your bed. Give me the agility roll to roll because here comes the axe. And then just let him spend the bennies. So keep track of everything. Do everything you can to make the player, you want to talk about immersion, do everything you can to make the player feel like this is a normal part of the game. This is actually happening in game. And then at just some odd point you wake up in your bed. And you've had that dream.
As soon as the blow lands and you roll damage, and the player goes, and you wake up.
Yep.
The machete tears through your chest, and then you burst awake. Your sheets and everything are sopping wet.
Yeah. Now, if you want to be a real dick, then guess what? This is a second dream within a dream sequence. So you let them go ahead and do something else, and at some point you wake up in your bed. What? Whatever I just did for the last 15 minutes after I already had the bad nightmare was also, it's part of the dream.
and let them
son
spend
of a bitch. Yeah, let them spend
let
bennies.
them spend the pennies. So another one I want to throw out there when we start talking ghost stories, a great reference point, if you haven't looked at it, is The Last Rites of the Blackguard from 12 to Midnight. It's pre-ETU era 12 to Midnight. And, I mean, it gets into, paranormal detectives and the devices they use and actual, behaviors of the poltergeist. It hits all those ghost story beats in a very contemporary, Western ranch style home in the prairies out in East Texas. It is absolutely anthema to the Victorian palatial mansion style. This all happens in a little, ranch home and a cul-de-sac. And the players are really kind of put through the ringer in that particular module. It's a great one to harvest ideas from.
Right. So just another thought real quick. So let's say we're doing a Friday the 13th slasher thing. One of the main characters is washing up in the bathroom looking in the mirror. As a GM, you just say, you see Jason standing behind you, give me a fear check. But when they turn around, there's nothing there. Do that. Do that kind of stuff. It's that simple storytelling-wise. Like, you glance up after you wipe your face and the killer's standing right behind your shoulder. You see his reflection in the mirror. Give me a fear check. And then when you turn around, there's nothing there. You're all alone. And when you actually have the main killer, the big bad of your story, ghost, demon, whatever it happens to be, do not be afraid to just continually give them the drop. As a GM, I would say do not be afraid to just continually just bam, they have the drop. Give the players every once. I'm not saying the whole way through an adventure, but we're running through a house. Jason was up there. We've been running around the house. We come down here. We come around the corner, and bam, there he is. Drop. He's got the drop. Because on a metagame level, anybody who plays Savage Worlds for a while knows the drop is some serious shit. So you can kind of get that buy-in and feeling at the table through the metagame of, oh, shit, and announces GM, oh, he has the drop. He's been waiting for you to come around this corner. And then the one last final thing I'll throw out, attack the player characters when they are at their most safest. Do not attack them when they're at their most vulnerable. Threaten them when they're at their most vulnerable. Give them the persistent threat of, oh, crap, he's going to get us. Oh, crap, the car's not going to start. Oh, crap, we can't get away. Oh, crap, oh, crap, oh, crap, oh, crap. Give them false hope. Let them make a phone call and have the police show up. And then the police gets out of the corner. Oh, yay, the police are here. And then gets run through by the killer. Give it to them and take it away. Give it to them and take it away. Give it to them and take it away. And then when they're feeling their most secure and safe, like, okay, we are in a concrete bunker with no windows and a locked steel door. There's absolutely, oh shit, he's in the building. He was already in here. That's when you have them actually attack. Or they're on a boat. They're getting away from the building. They think they've burned him down, his shack with him in it. They're on the lake. They're boating, rowing away, and then he just jumps up out of the water and grabs them. And I will say this: do not be afraid to end a horror session on a cliffhanger like that.
Oh, I think you should.
So with that, we will go ahead and wrap it up. We'll do some quick pip. Should be pretty short with only 2 tonight. And then next week, I'm going to go ahead and kind of pre-announce it. We're going to be doing Halloween themed and horror themed episodes for the rest of October. Next week, Monster Mash. We're going to talk about creating excellent monsters for your horror adventures for Halloween. Maybe even recreating some of the Universal monsters. Blah, 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 so on and so forth. So, Pivot. We'll start with Chris. Pivot.
So we just put out the latest issue of Savage Cast. You can get that on iTunes, SavageCast.com, Stitcher. Go to Look for us on Facebook, on G+. Give us questions, comments, all that fun stuff. It was a pretty good episode.
Excellent. Dave, pivot.
So, for all of you out there who want to, have great T-shirts to wear for Gen Con this year, you want to, bulk out your wardrobe a little differently than what you have. It's a website that I have been aware of for a while, but I wanted to throw it out there again because it kind of cropped up by surprise to me here recently that they had a new shirt I wanted, and that's Armor Class 10. And it's not just shirts, that you can get other stuff as well, but it's all geek all the time. A lot of gaming reference stuff on there. There's also a lot of pop culture stuff that's right in the wheelhouse of most savages, and it's a great way to get yourself some really interesting apparel, bags, etc. that you just aren't going to find anywhere else.
Excellent. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe to iTunes. Savage Worlds GM Podcast. SWGMH on Twitter. SWGMH Podcast. Oh, actually, SWGMH Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. Go and if you want, if you're a game master, you want to participate in the conversation, go head over to the Savage Worlds Game Masters community on G+. We're a small but dedicated and growing group. We like to argue. So until next time, this is Jared, Savage Daddy Gutting, for Dave and Chris, saying keep rolling and stay savage.